This is Yurii from Data Forest, and it means that we have another episode of our amazing podcast, Empower the Data, where business begins with data and the AI leads the way. And today's guest, that's not just a person from the LinkedIn or from our network. This is the good friend of our company, and his name is Benjamin Milarch. Guys, give a big round of applause. Yay!
Hey, thanks for having me here, Yurii. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a pleasure to have you here. I'm pretty glad that we found the time in your tough schedule to record this podcast, because for our listeners, they definitely don't know, but I was trying to pull Benjamin to this podcast already more than a month, and today we made it. And just a small thing about that right now for Benjamin, it's 4:30 a.m. So he's so busy that he found the time just so early in the morning, and I really appreciate it, Ben, so thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, to our listeners, let me briefly introduce you to Benjamin. In your profile, that's a lot of great things about you, and I know they're all true. I'm just gonna highlight some of them for our listeners. Benjamin is operations leader and program manager with supply chain modernization, SaaS management, AI implementation, process improvement, organizational assessment, and the list goes on. Award-winning leader and problem-solving strategist with several decades of experience in government. And I'm not gonna say anything else because I want you, Benjamin, tell us a little bit more about yourself. So please, word for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Yurii. I would say I'm a generalist, right? And so a lot of the places that I've been and a lot of things I've done, I've had a chance to work on significant, impactful projects or tasks or programs, but I've really tried to understand how they work collectively. So, starting way back when I was young, I got a physics undergrad, and I think there is when I learned systems thinking. Right? You can always zoom out on a problem, and if anyone who's spent any time in special or general relativity knows that your frame of reference is huge when it comes to making good decisions. And so along the way, data has been a big part of my life, both in the Air Force. I was a helicopter pilot by trade, and then I was an advisor in Iraq. I spent some time on the air staff working on nuclear programs. I went to Intel school for a year, and then I was an inspector general. And then in the private sector, I tried to run a consulting company with a couple of my friends, and we worked with the VA. And now I am an independent kind of contractor, but also I started my own company so that we can grow in the future with a lot of that consulting work.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And can you please tell us a little bit more about your company? Like, what exactly you guys do, what are you focusing on, and what is the plans?
Yeah.
Because, as you said, you just kind of recently started, but I'm pretty sure
Yes.
that with your experience and background, that's going to grow, and what's the plan?
Yeah, the plan is to be a venture studio, and so by that I mean I want to make things amazing, right? And I want to take that systems thinking, and I want to build credible and enduring programs or companies that are going to eventually outgrow me. That's the goal, is to make things that are so solid and so capable that I work myself out of a job. That's what I've tried to do in every role I've ever been in, and I've tried to do things like documentation and processes that for someone new to an environment, they can come in, make something fantastic, take over what I've done, make it better. But I've laid enough solid groundwork that I'm no longer necessary. And so that's the intention with Formworks. And I use the name Formworks. It's from when people pour concrete, they need to shape it, and eventually it becomes solid on its own to the point where those forms or those formworks are no longer needed. And that's my intention for my company, is to say I want to come in, I want to help something start, I want to build it from not much into something great, and then I'm going to step away. And so that's the long-term view for my current company.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, and for our listeners can say that I had a pleasure to work with Ben, and I know exactly what he's talking about. He always diving very deep in every single aspect of every single project, and he knows what he's talking about. And what I want to ask you, Benjamin, of course, that's about the data.
Yeah.
What's the role data plays in your business?
Absolutely. So data in my mind is, I was thinking about this question prior to our conversation, is that it's going to be an essential building block of every single thing that everyone does forever, right? I don't think there's a world where we regress on data availability. I was thinking about the words of an instructor I had that worked at the NSA, our national security agency, and he said, when they are working for data, when they're looking for data, when they're working with data, it's no longer looking for a needle in a haystack. It's very much looking for a needle in a needle stack, where everything could be relevant. And I heard on one of your previous podcasts the discussion of signal to noise ratio. So making systems that are going to achieve some goal is how you shape the data you call and the data you utilize and the data you leverage. So it's about setting up the problems and the variables in the right way so that the data tells you what you need. There's a variety of things that augment the way I do my work every day, right? And the project on which you and I met is exclusively a data project, but it's meant to achieve a business or a leadership outcome, right? So while the whole project that we're working on is built on, do we understand what we're doing? It's still meant to solve a singular problem. And so that singular problem, this particular one happens to be in the automotive industry. There have been others in the I worked with high-tech medical equipment for a while. Like I mentioned, I worked on the nuclear enterprise. A lot of those things boil down to what's the story we're trying to tell, and also what's the quality of that data that we're going to utilize. So that's the summary.
Yeah, totally agree about the quality of the data. And just out of curiosity, because you're the good specialist in getting the data, let's say you do some analysis for some project. How are you getting the data for this project? Where are you pulling this data from, and how you combine the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. The data sources on many of my most recent projects have been highly varied, right? Some of them are well refined in well-established industries that have their own data feeds and are just data-rich environments. Some of them we've looked at independent scrapers, right? Independent data collectors that are doing all that data hygiene for you. And then there have
That's
been
something
less
that we
refined.
also can do.
That's right. That's right. We'll make it a long data force commercial. But there are human elements to data that are oftentimes where you find the biggest challenge, right? And so I think of myself as an integrator to make sure all the components of the system can work with each other and then still flow functionally and deliver those outcomes that we discussed earlier. But the human element is inseparable in a lot of ways, right? Especially if you don't have machines doing the initial data collection, right? So if you're in, let's say you're in like a cybersecurity environment, right? And you've got machine learning as a huge component of that entire industry, where every call, every interaction is already logged and flagged and sorted, right? There are elements of, you've got robust data with very specific parameters for how those fields are created and how everything's documented, right? That's kind of one end of the spectrum. Then you've got another end of the spectrum is where I told you I'm trying to forge ahead with my company, is where things don't necessarily exist already, And so you've got to do a lot of like human interaction. You've got to do a lot of discovery, a lot of explanation, probably a lot of education, just to get folks through the initial change management steps to get them into a data hygiene kind of mindset. And then you've got some things in the middle where it's a long-standing industry. I point to medical, for example. In talking to a data scientist a little while ago, he said, there are a lot of transcription things that happen in the medical community where, his wife is a nurse and she has to scan charts and then manually transfer things into charts. On one of your previous podcasts, they mentioned specifically how nurses have to load codes into billing systems, and if there's errors there, that kind of lets the system break down. It ends up in a financial loss for the institution. So there are different levels of data quality that are available, different levels of data hygiene, and certainly different levels of data availability. I think as we trend forward, data availability goes up, but it's inseparable from the work. But I would say there's a flip side of that coin, is that some folks make the data the work, right? And well, if that's your industry and that's your specialty, great. However, sometimes the data itself doesn't tell you the right story, right? You have to ask the right questions, and you have to know what story you're trying to tell first. So I worked with an individual before that said, hey, on every engagement that I do, I'm collecting over 500 data points and logging them. And I said, well, which ones are the most important? He's like, I don't know. I'll figure that out later. And so he's got the data hygiene and data capture in mind, but he didn't design a system that necessarily has a goal. And sometimes that's fine, right? If you're early on and you don't know exactly where you're going, that makes sense. But I'm going to start with the end in mind, guy. So what outcome or what objectives am I trying to accomplish? And then I want to make sure I'm collecting and managing and monitoring the data appropriately to get me there. So yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty open answer. Thank you for that. And based on your answer, the next question is, you mentioned that kind of humans and the data inseparable right now, and that's not a lot of things that might be automated, but a lot of things can be. And if we're talking about automation, what do you think, how the automation can help not just to save time, but improve the quality of the data and some results of the business later on, some conclusions made?
Yeah, absolutely. So automation is a massive part of how I operate every day, right? While I am in these meetings with humans, I am certainly capturing data. I am certainly letting AI note takers do parallel note taking with me. I try and flag what I have, but also there's the review. And then when it comes to process automations, right? Like even just getting those initial conversations with people, you can use booking agents, you can use reminders, right? You can use so many things. And so without conscious choice, automation has permeated almost every minute of my day, right? Whether I wanted to or not. And then also there are essential tasks that I'm currently trying to automate with my work that letting a human do 100 calculations in a 8-hour window, it can easily be replaced by letting a machine do tens of thousands of calculations in seconds, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's just an order of magnitude faster that work can happen. So the founder of Ask Sage, that's an AI company here in the U.S., and former chief software officer of the United States Air Force, Nicholas Shalon, was a host on a podcast that I hosted for a while, or a guest on a podcast I hosted, and in that conversation he talked about white collar workers especially getting 33 times faster with the support of AI and digital tools, right? Excuse me. And so it's not about replacing the workers in this case. It's about letting them get a lot more done in their given day, and that makes sense in one context. However, in my context, I'm actually trying to find a way to build companies leaner, right? And so if what would be a 50 to 75 person, footprint for a company, what if we could do that with like 15 people, right? So if you can shrink how many folks you need to make your work go, either you can go much faster, or you can eliminate 80% of your most expensive human capital investment. So that's kind of how I'm using it. That's how I see automation as a key function of my life. And then obviously we're working directly with you guys to help us map out some automations in a business process, right? So can we buy things faster? Can we prioritize the value of those things faster? Then can we bring those things to market faster? And can we, if we accelerate every step of this process, then either we're making lives much easier for ourselves to accomplish the same goals, or we're expanding how many things we can do in a given unit of time. So that's the big picture. Thanks, Yurii.
Okay, thank you for answering. The tricky question about that. What do you think? What is the most valuable part of automation? Is that manual working hours cutting, or that's excluding of human error in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the acceleration will always be great, but that's a question of scale, right? And so if I could pay humans one-tenth as much, I could still go faster. I think the eliminating errors is probably the more impactful part from this particular process, right? That's not going to be the case for everything, right? The Department of Veterans Affairs went through a technological modification on using AI for evaluating disability claims, right? And so most disability claims were taking several months before this AI tool was implemented. And then it went down to just literally minutes per claim, but it took the entire process from months to weeks, under 2 weeks, right? And so a veteran saying, "Hey, I've got an issue," or I've filed my claim. There are some of those, and you can look up horror stories of folks that basically the process languished for years. I think that the reduction of errors was essential for that thing to move forward, right? And you can say, if there would have been significant errors in any of those documentations as they did their review, then it would have been killed on the spot. So in that use case, it needed to be accurate, but the goal was time savings. On the project I'm working on in the automotive industry, I think people making mistakes, literally every mistake that they make can cost them thousands of dollars, and then you do that same process, hundreds, if not thousands of times a month, then you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss a month, potential risk. Boy, it would be nice to eliminate that. So
pretty scalable mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And so you want to make sure that's right, and also you don't want to pull an Office Space / Superman 4 mistake where a slight a rounding error ends up costing your company, bankrupting your company or costing you, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think there are times where either is the priority, right? And so in my current role with this automotive work, I think it's reduction of errors is probably the more important part, but honestly the time savings when we start scaling, that could end up being a way to say the errors are less important because we've done so much work so fast that a couple mistakes here and there are more than tolerable, but time will tell.
Yeah, thank you for answering. And yeah, definitely time saving, that's the great thing that's going to happen, because as an example, we had one project where we helped insurance companies in the United Kingdom save up to 9,600 working hours per month. if we're talking about average salary, about $30 per hour for this position, we're talking about a $300,000 per month is
Yeah.
3.6 millions a year. And when you
Yeah.
think this in this kind of time range, you think, oh yeah, that's impressive. And I totally agree about that with you. And you already kind of mentioned a bit the topic of AI and AI implementation. And I just want to ask you, what do you think about AI nowadays? And do you use AI in your daily routine, except like a note taking maybe? Or if you don't use it yet, do you have a plan to implement something? If yes, what's that going to be?
Yes, yes, and so both in the past and in the future, the projects I've focused on have leaned heavily on AI. As far as my daily routine, it is loosely part of my daily routine, but as far as the work that I'm doing, it's all built around leveraging AI. So the tool we're currently trying to build, again, is in the automotive industry, and it's very AI centric. It's very built towards a couple components of AI, right? If we want to say we've got uh, we've got the machine learning part of, as we get data, we will refine our processes, right? I think that's part of it. I think there's also a component of the large language model, natural language processing component of it, where we want it to be able to interact with customers in an effective way. And then I think you've also have the expectation that AI will be baked in was part of day one, right? There was never any part of this project that did not include AI in its future. I think that's going to be an essential part of almost any. If you look at any digital process, that's going to be part of everything for the future, right? Like, I can't open a software tool now and not have it ask me if I want to use AI, right? And that's just going to be the way it is, right? And so there are, you've got a half a dozen different components of AI or different use cases that maybe we've been using since the 1930s or the 1960s or the 1980s, depending on what aspect you're looking at, but all in conjunction all the time is just so readily available that it's hard to say I have an aspect of my life where I don't really use AI, right? Even my kid's dance studio, I can tell that the scheduling people are using AI to make sure that all the dancers are in the right time slots with the right clusters of with the right clusters of dancers for the right routines. So it's just part of life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And the next question that I have regarding AI, because I've been going to a lot of conferences last year, and what I noticed from the speakers' speeches that like 1 year ago, people were talking about AI like just the future in general. So that's going to be everywhere. That's going to help you do this and that and that. But later on, they kind of change the priority of AI more for cost saving and money saving. So the old speeches went down to that point where AI will help you save some money. Like it can help you to, just an example, to implement some AI agent for cold calling, and
Yeah.
that will replace your employees, and that's going to help you to save some time and save some money. Or you can automate this process with AI and save some money. So basically right now people are not talking about AI like the kind of potential bright future tool that will be not
Mm-hmm.
just a co-pilot or assistant, but a bit more than that. Now that's a money saving tool. And what do you think about that? And how do you see AI in a few years? And what is AI for you in general?
Yeah. Yeah, so AI for me is a tool, right? And there are many tools, and this one happens to be incredibly powerful, right? So, um, to lean on a pretty common analogy, you don't want to be the last person riding a horse as cars are driving by you, right? And so So you want to make sure that you are staying competitive, or you're staying as agile and swift as possible. And AI is a fantastic tool for that. I think the two sides of your question there are: is AI transforming the way work is done, or is AI modifying work that's being done for acceleration and cost savings? I think that there's an element of both. I think that depending on what you're doing, AI is irrelevant, or your entire world, right? And so if I'm a theater performer, my performance may not be impacted at all by the use of AI because it's meant to be a purely human experience. However, the way I rehearse and the way I train may actually be driven quite a bit by AI. I might be using AI tools and Quizlet and things like that to help me get ready to deliver that very human on human experience. As far as refining the way humans deliver even their human to human experiences, the ability to capture notes and the ability to provide feedback, it can be your full-time training manager if you let it on a sales floor, right? So the necessary integration, I think, is always there. I think again, like I said, it's going to be part of the world moving forward. Unless you were in the business of building cars, though, the cars were not the end product of that transition from horse to car, right? The transition from horse to car let people drive faster. It let people transport more goods. It let people be more interconnected. It changed the way kind of the American infrastructure is designed.
Oh, yeah.
You know, everything around the U.S. is very car centric, whereas you can see in a lot of the older nations or older regions around the world, it's not very hospitable for cars, and then there are also newer developing places that it's not very hospitable for cars. So how does your tool empower, enable, accelerate, and or modify, manage risk, all those things for your business? I will say there are some horror stories about how AI has been turned loose, and one of them is from the insurance industry, the medical insurance industry, right, where I think United Health had a 90% rejection rate with their AI-supported claims, right? And so they're taking all their money, and then they're letting a robot prevent them from delivering that money, which means, you know, number go up, profit is, you know, through the roof. So I think, like any tool, it can be used for, you know, not necessarily good or evil purposes, but really the tool enables you to do some outcome. So the outcomes themselves may be, you know, good or evil or selfish or philanthropic, but the tool, regardless, isn't the one necessarily to blame. As far as cost reduction versus transformation, I think it depends, right? A terribly soft answer, but it depends on your desired outcomes.
So, and probably the last question about AI for today, because slowly but surely we're getting to the end of our podcast. Where do you see AI, let's say in 5, maybe 10 years? How do you think, which point that's going to reach?
I think that there will be elements of our life where AI is doing things that humans are doing now, for sure, right? If AI can already monitor your purchases in a grocery store, at what point do cashiers become obsolete, right? And if you translate that thing that was very, very human in the past into an automated experience, that can be done via in-store cameras and simple monitoring, and then you accomplish your transaction and then you're out, or you don't even accomplish your transaction because that's already happening in some stores. I think there are many applications across all of our lives and all dimensions of our lives that are going to be heavily impacted, right? I know that there are lawyers and doctors who traditionally have used assistants or paralegals or note takers in the room with them, and I see a lot of those roles being replaced or modified significantly by the implementation of natural language processing, large language model type AI. As far as software that can learn from itself and improve the way it accomplishes its tasks, while those things may have existed in the past, the bar of entry for getting into that space is much lower, because I don't need to know everything to accomplish more than I could in the past, right? I now have a very reliable assistant that sometimes confabulates, right? And so I know they don't like the term hallucination because it implies a sentience.
But there
right?
exists.
Yeah. Confabulation of like, hey, all this is made up, and I think at some point, right, that confabulation, some of those things will get resolved, and so you've got an increased level of trust in the information that you're providing or information you're receiving from a chatbot type of tool. I think also the strength of the services industry will go up. A lot of the problems that service industries have comes to reliability, and I think that AI is an amazing tool when it comes to reliability, where you can schedule more effectively and get reminders more effectively. I think that's a huge one. There are some limitations where if you offload everything your prefrontal cortex does to a machine, then maybe the quality of your skills diminish, and so there's probably a way to hedge against that. And right now, I think there's kind of like a bathtub model in how much you can trust AI, right? If you know absolutely nothing and the stakes are low, you can put all your trust in AI and not stress because the stakes are low and you're starting from nothing to something. So you can get really educated on a framework or a comparison or a this versus that relatively easily using some type of chat tool, right? Then there's kind of like an area where AI isn't necessarily much better than you would be if you have some knowledge on something but not a lot, or if you're pretty good at something and you don't have a specific tool to help you. And then there's again a peak in value at the high end where it's, I know exactly what I want to do. I know exactly the problem I'm trying to solve. I know exactly how a tool can help me, and this is where you can leverage for incredible gain, right? I can build a tool that does exactly what I need it to do, and I can have it learn to make me more effective than, like they said, the 33 people, right, from that study. So in that value bathtub, I use it in a variety of ways in my life. Are you going to, in 5 or 10 years, are you going to bring up that floor of where the bottom of the bathtub is barely better than a moderately skilled individual? Are you going to increase the spikes at the opposite end of value? I think right now the spikes in quality that you can improve probably impact your previous statement about cost reduction, risk reduction, because you are accelerating and automating processes. So your return on investment from an AI tool is not only delivering your processes well and delivering your systems well, but also reducing how many people you need to accomplish that. That's actually where we're designing a new project that I'm working on, is in that neighborhood of highly expert, highly specific tasks that need to be replicated swiftly and then scaled, right? And so could we have done this 10 years ago? I don't think so. Certainly not the same way. And then 10 years from now, what would that look like? Is it still going to be a team? Is it still going to be a small team that uses supporting developers, or is it going to be 1 or 2 people that are leveraging a tool? So I hope that the confidence can improve, right? The confidence can increase in the tools. I hope your confabulations go down. I hope that your reliability of like schedules and human interactions go down, or goes up, I'm sorry, and that your breakdowns are eliminated. No. I hope your reliability of human interaction goes up. So a couple of those things that I said already, and then I hope that we still have a way to make human-to-human interaction still very meaningful, but probably be a lot more specific and targeted on those conversations. So that's kind of my estimation of where we're going.
Okay. Let's see. We gotta record it. We're actually doing this right now, and we're gonna take a look at this interview, this podcast in 5 years, and let's see where we're gonna be at that point. If AI is not gonna destroy it like in Terminator 2. So, but that's another story. And because we're running out of time, I have just one more question left that I always ask my podcast speakers. Benjamin, what would be the final statement to our listeners from you?
Yeah, my final statement is that purpose is essential to designing any system or tool, and you want to make sure that your purpose is both valid and hopefully beneficial to others. So building something because you can doesn't necessarily make it good. Sometimes you want to experiment and you want to do things in a test environment, but relying too heavily on the tools to accomplish things that are dangerous or that are bad for other people, please don't. That's my final statement, right? My final statement is please try and find a way to use whatever tools and skills and software that we have to help our fellow humans and treat each other with love and kindness. So that's my final statement.
That's actually pretty good. So, Benjamin, thank you so much for your time this early morning today. And for our listeners, one more time, that was Benjamin Milarch with us today in our studio, and we really appreciate his time. And to our listeners, I want to say, guys, that's gonna be very soon in our channel, and you can find this video on LinkedIn. And we're gonna move on to our next interview, next podcast with our next guest. So I'll see you soon. Thank you for being with us. Stay safe, stay cool, stay awesome. Right, Benjamin?
That's right. Stay awesome.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, and have a good one.
Thank you.
Everybody, ciao for now. See you soon.